Welcome to Dying in Grace, the program that explores all aspects of living well and dying well and all things that integrate death back into the cycle, the natural cycle of life. My name is Arlene Stepputat, and each week I like to bring a person on our show who has a unique background, experience, information, and story to enhance our understanding of the death and dying experience. And this week I'm delighted to have as my guest my friend Barbara Bartolome. Thank you again for coming, Barbara.
It's a joy to be here with you.
Well, Barbara, I invited you specifically because of your own unique experiences. So I'm going to start perhaps by having you tell me what that little pin that you're wearing, it says NDE, and what is that, and how does that tie into what we're going to talk about tonight?
That stands for near-death experience, and so I am a two-time near-death experiencer. I had one when I don't remember it at all, but when I was 18 months old. I didn't find out about it until I was about 55 when an older brother disclosed it to me. And I had one when I was 31 years old here in Santa Barbara. And so those two really changed my life, and I now have a group in Santa Barbara that I bring experiencers that are from all over to come and talk here in Santa Barbara about their experiences and how it changed their lives. And
so stop one second, because there might be people that don't know what that means, a near-death experiencer. What exactly is that, and what is the experience that you had?
Yeah, well, it is kind of misnamed, and it was derived from a name that Raymond Moody named it in 1980s when he wrote a book called Life After Life, and it's actually should be called a death experience because it is happening when people are in cardiac arrest and are dead. There are also near-death-like experiences when the person is not actually dead, but there's a little confusion out there in the world about those two names. And so it is when the cardiac arrest occurs and the person generally will leave their body, which is called an out-of-body situation, and they can see a tunnel and a light at the end of the tunnel. They can go to a different location and experience loved ones that passed over prior to that moment. And they can experience also spiritual beings like Jesus or God or Buddha or whatever their belief system runs into. And they then are returned to their body, and sometimes they're given a life review before that happens, so they see what they have done in their life, and then there's correction that they do after they've come back. Seeing perhaps that they weren't maybe being as loving or kind to people as they would be when they came back and saw that that was important for them to do. So when they're resuscitated, oftentimes they don't talk about it. And it was really very muted by the media for many, many, many years. And it has now come out in the media quite often, and there are a number of famous near-death experiencers that are Hollywood types. That,
but before we go to the famous ones, so because you've said quite a bit, and it sounds like the experience can have a wide range of elements to it, you know, and I think people have heard go to the light and the light tunnel. I mean, that has been around since Raymond Moody's book, Life After Life. And I think people have heard aspects of it, life review. Shirley MacLaine was in that movie, Defending Your Life, which had a whole scenario about what happens when you leave, some of what you're talking about, potential life review and those types of things. So tell us a little bit about your experience.
Okay. Well, the one that I remember is the one in 1987 here in Santa Barbara at St. Francis Hospital. And I had ruptured a disc in my back after the birth of my daughter. And she was 5 months old when I went into the hospital to have that corrected by a medical team that was a neurosurgeon here in town and an orthopedic surgeon. And the night before they were going to do the surgery, they had decided to do another diagnostic test. So when I got to St. Francis Hospital, they prepped me for a myelogram, which is injection of iodine dye into your spinal cord.
Right.
You're on an x-ray table. They tip the x-ray table so that the dye goes down your back with gravity, and then they x-ray the area of your spinal cord where the dye, where the disc blew and the dye is down at, to see if the spinal cord has been damaged by the fragments of the disc that blew out. And so they had me on the x-ray table. Both of the doctors were in the room, 2 x-ray techs were in the room, and a nurse was in the room. And when they tipped the table, unfortunately the x-ray tech pushed the wrong button on the x-ray table, and he lowered my head instead of raising it. And I immediately felt very strange, as though something was wrong, and I then progressed to being very worried about the fact that I felt like I was going to faint, and I had no concept that I would die. And eventually, after about, I would say, 30 seconds to a minute and a half, my eyes started rolling to the back of my head, and I realized I should really alert someone that something was wrong. And when I realized that the 2 x-ray techs were having a discussion between them, and so I didn't want to interrupt them initially. And so when I finally did try to interrupt, I couldn't speak and I couldn't raise my hand. My functions were diminished because of the dye flowing into my brain. And so what ended up happening was that after I had the eyes rolling back, I started hyperventilating, and that's what alerted the 2 x-ray techs that something was wrong. And so the x-ray tech leaned over my face, saw my eyes were rolling to the back of my head, and then he leaned back to see where his thumb was on the side of the x-ray table, and realized he had his thumb on the wrong button and was lowering my head. And that's when he kind of looked shocked, and right at that point I left my body, shut my eyes, and went up on the ceiling. And the difference between the 2 feelings was that I was panicked in my body, but in the next second when I was up on the ceiling looking down at my body, I was completely calm, and I said, if I'm up here and my body is down there and he's calling code blue, I think I must have died. So there was no panic whatsoever up there. I felt wrapped in love. I felt completely at peace. I realized in the next moment that there was someone next to me, and I had no need to look to see if there was a physical presence or a light or anything like that. It felt like someone I had known forever through eternity, and it felt like an amazing being that I kind of equated at the moment as being God. And
okay, so that's a lot. Okay, so you're on the table, they tilt you, and it sounds like it happened in a short amount of time, like within a minute and a half or 2 minutes.
Right.
You know, they push the wrong button, the dye's going to your brain, and the next thing you know, you go from panic. Although, like, it's interesting that you had the kind of in your consciousness, like, oh, they're talking, let them finish, I'm not going to interrupt them. And then the next thing, you're out and out of your body. While you're in your consciousness looking down on this, what was going on with them? I heard you say cold blue. So were they? And how did you come back?
They called code blue. They immediately began CPR, and then.
Now, did you have any sensation of that yourself, or were
I couldn't feel my body at all. I was just watching from above.
Them do it.
Yeah, and it literally felt as though I had no real connection to my body. Like it was no different than just looking at a wetsuit down below. There wasn't any angst, like, oh my God, I have to go back. You know, oh my God, I'm out of my body. There was nothing like that at all. It was simply looking at my body very calmly, watching them. They actually were panicking because I don't think they planned to have me go into cardiac arrest.
Right.
Yeah. So they ended up bringing in an oxygen cart. A woman brought in an oxygen cart, and they put a mask on my face, and they were still doing CPR chest compressions. And then the nurse was calling on the phone over in the corner of the room for the defib unit to be brought in, and the this man brought in a box that wasn't the defib unit, but it was actually a heart monitor, and he connected it up to my body. I watched him do it, and when he flicked the toggle switch to turn it on, it was flatlining. And I actually watched the flatline just going across the screen, and the monotone sound making a loud, beep.
Right, right.
So what ended up happening was that maybe I would say it was 8 to 10 minutes that I was dead, and the neurosurgeon ended up talking to the orthopedic surgeon, and they were standing back. They were letting the other team members handle the situation, and he said, "Too much time has passed. She's going to have brain damage. We need to do something." And the orthopedic surgeon said, "Stand clear," and the x-ray tech stepped away from the front of where my head was at the top of the table, and he stepped 2 steps forward and took his fist and from behind his back swung it over his head, and he did what's called a precardial thump, and he struck his fist onto the center of my chest. And that's a last-ditch effort that they will do if you don't have a defib unit in to try to restart the patient's heart. And it's
now you saw him doing all this.
Oh, I saw it completely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so after the first strike was the interesting part of it. During the time before that strike, I had felt that being up there next to me, and so what I had done was say to him or her that I needed to go back into my life, because I was in a situation that I was married to someone who was an engineer here in Santa Barbara, and I had 2 children, my daughter who was 5 months old and my son who was 8 years old, and I was in a pretty abusive situation that I wasn't telling anyone about. And so what I saw up above was the thought of, if I leave at this time, that my children will be unprotected. And so I said that to the being and said, I really need to go back into my life to protect my children. I need to go back. If I leave, they're going to be in trouble, and I'm not going to be able to protect them any longer. Also, the minute that I was out of my body, the understanding of what my life purpose was came to me immediately, and it wasn't as though I knew that I had planned it, or if I knew that like God had planned it. It just was this absolute knowledge of what I needed to do in my life, and that I had not done it yet. There was a particular thing that I needed to do, I had planned, and it was planned for me to do, and I hadn't started it. So I was saying to the being as well, I need to return to be able to do that work. So when the first strike happened on my chest with the doctor doing the precordial thump, the being then spoke to me, and it was this amazingly calm voice, and it said, "But if you go back, you'll still be in your marriage. What will you do?" And then I saw all of these short little film clips of all of these abuse situations that I had been living through in the marriage. And I was then given all the time that I needed to analyze what I had done and in the situation that I was in, and what I wanted to do. Did I want to stay out of my body and be safe? Did I want to go back into that very scary and traumatic situation? So I evaluated what I had done with my husband in trying to have his behaviors change in his life. And I had gone to marriage family therapy, and I'd gone to a pastor of a church, and I'd written him notes and pleaded and begged. And all the years that we'd been married, he hadn't made any changes. He'd always promised to change, but then it would always go back to the abuse. So I actually figured out up on the ceiling, after analyzing that it wasn't him that needed to change, it was actually me. Mm-hmm. So I needed to make myself stronger.
So you saw, in these clips, so you're saying while you're having these life review and you're having this chance to reevaluate your responsibility for the situation you were in,
Exactly.
and an awareness that you had tasks to do. And I find it really fascinating to your cognizance of still that mother's love, even out of, you couldn't not love your children.
Right.
That was the draw to return, among other things. And I've heard people talk about this amazing light and feeling of love and peace. It's hard to know, but do you think if you hadn't had children, you would have stayed out of your body?
Oh, definitely.
You would have?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It is, it's like, it feels as though you're back into your real state. When you're out of your body seems nothing more than a wetsuit, but you're still the same being up on top of the ceiling, but you're released somehow, and it feels so beautiful.
Well, years ago there was that movie called Cocoon.
Oh, I didn't see it.
Oh, you must. It's a movie where there's aliens, really, that come to a geriatric center and they zip out of their suits, and then they're just bright light zooming around, you know. So, and Ram Dass also speaks about our physical bodies as our spacesuits to negotiate the planet.
Exactly.
You know? So for you, it seemed like you had adequate time to make these decisions. On the ground, in the physical reality of the operating room, or the room you were in, how much time had elapsed? You said 10 minutes?
Between 8 and 10 minutes is what I estimate, and I don't, by the time that I spoke about my near-death experience, I contacted St. Francis Hospital, and they gave me the word that they had destroyed all my records, and that was appropriate because I didn't speak about it for 20 years, and they only had a requirement to keep it for 7 years, and so that's what happens with a lot of the near-death experiencers, because we're so closed about it and we aren't talking about it, and that's why this pin is so important for a near-death experience, to have a chance to connect with others as well as talk about their experience with others so that they can help teach about it.
So you go back into your body, you choose to go back for your children.
I literally said to the being, if you let me go back, I promise you that I'll get strong enough to leave him. And the second I said that, the doctor did the second precordial thump, and I literally shut my eyes up on the ceiling and opened them with his fist on my chest.
Wow.
And he was just an arm's length away from me, and I spoke into the oxygen mask and said, "What just happened?" And the nurse leaned over me and said, "Stop, don't talk, we need to stabilize you, don't talk." And so for 20 minutes, I just, I had never heard of a near-death experience. I had never meditated. I had not gone out of body. I did not know anything about it. And so I was 31 years old and, raising children and working full-time. And so I then ended up at the 20-minute mark when they took the oxygen mask off. I blurted out, "What just happened?" I was up on the ceiling and I could see and hear everything. And the neurosurgeon and the orthopedic surgeon were standing there, and the neurosurgeon said, "Oh, brother." Well, that was actually the best thing that he could have done, because it made me want to be validating the situation. And I said, "No, I was up on the ceiling. She was the person who brought in the oxygen cart. That man brought in the heart monitor. I watched it flatlining. She was on the phone the whole time calling for the defib unit. You two were doing CPR on me until..."
So you recounted the experience so they knew that you had borne witness to it.
And as I did that, the neurosurgeon clenched his fist. He was standing right next to the table, clenched his fist and kind of pulled his arms up, and then at the end he said, "I am not going to stand here and listen to this," and he stormed out of the room. But the orthopedic surgeon took my hand, and the rest of the team stayed there, and he said, "What else did you see, and what did you feel?" and everything. 25 years later, he, through one of his people in his office, told her to tell me that I had changed his medical protocols, because if I could come down off that ceiling that I said that I was on and accurately describe what had happened in my resuscitation, that he realized that people in cardiac arrest might do it in the future, and that he'd better be very careful during cardiac arrest situations to make sure that he said and did the exact thing that he would want reported.
So in that experience, you have one person, one medical professional who sees something new, is curious and validates, and then you have another person that dismisses it. And I would expect that with near-death experiences, yes, people are talking about it, and certainly Raymond Moody, that book came out years ago,
yes.
And he's still continuing research, and there's much more talk about near-death studies, but I would guess you sometimes have the medical professional or other people who say, what you are describing is just part of what happens when the brain goes down, or they will try or can offer a medical or physiological experience for lack of oxygen to the brain, or like you just you hallucinated. Although, I mean, how can you describe something that went on when you weren't there? But you know that there are skeptics out there that can talk, that feel that there's a physiological explanation for the experiencer's account. How do you talk to those people?
I don't. I let them have their ideas. The research that's being done is to offset their information, and it's coming out more and more from the University of Virginia Division of Perceptual Studies, and also Pim van Lommel, a cardiologist in the Netherlands, who are doing studies that prove that these near-death experiences are real, that they are not, lack of oxygen to the brain. If I had lack of oxygen to the brain, I would have been laying in my body on that table and not be able, my eyes were shut, and not be able to, I was in cardiac arrest. I wouldn't have been able to tell what was happening in that room. And for me to be able to see those people from above and be able to report what they said and did, my story pretty much blows that out of the water. And that's why I've been interviewed on the NBC Today Show and US News and World Report, and I've got documentaries on YouTube, and I've been asked to speak all over, because my story is a little different than most people. They generally don't speak about it once they come back into their body. They're shocked and they don't say anything to anyone. I spoke up. And so
from the beginning you spoke up.
Exactly, the minute that I was back in my body.
So do you think that was the mission, that you hadn't,
yes.
That you were having your mission revealed even though you didn't know it at the time?
Exactly.
So in the remaining time we have, let's talk about how that mission has manifested here in our community. Talk to us a little bit about IANDS Santa Barbara and how that fits into the larger picture of experiencers around the world.
Yeah, the IANDS organization started in about 1980s, and
let's tell people what that stands for.
Yes, that's International Association for Near-Death Studies, and it was about 5 researchers and doctors that were seeing patients that were coming through with near-death experiences, and because they couldn't explain them, they decided to do research and start an organization fully straight on with research. But over the years, that organization morphed into support for experiencers, and that's what these groups are all across the United States. There's about 50 of them. I'm one of the largest groups. I started mine here in 2011 after a Santa Barbara News Press article profiled my near-death experience, and I have had all the famous near-death experiencers come and speak at my group here in Santa Barbara. When Eben Alexander came, doctor from Harvard University who had a near-death experience.
And he also wrote a book,
Proof of Heaven.
Proof of Heaven,
and
right.
He is quite well known. There were 900 people in the audience listening to his near-death experience. And Dr. Mary Neal, an orthopedic surgeon from Jackson Hole, Wyoming, who had a kayaking accident and was timed underwater for more than 28 minutes. She came and talked here, and she had a near-death experience as well, and she's very open. She's been on Oprah and everything. There are a lot of these people out there, and they actually estimate with these research that they're doing that there are 20 million people in the United States alone that have had near-death experiences. And
so let me just ask you, how did your near-death experience change your life? Besides your mission and starting this group, in your day-to-day living, what shifted for you?
Well, the second near-death experience was a tailgater to the first one. So the first one occurred when I was 18 months old, and I was never told about it. So an older brother told me about it. He did not know about my second one. And I see the changes in me versus my siblings, my friends, my family. I grew up as a very caring child, and I loved and cared about people more than most people would. And so that was one of the aspects that was just naturally an after effect that they've proven now that near-death experiencers have. Also, I had incredible intuition. So as a child, I was actually told to, submerse it and not to show it. And I now have had so many incidents that were so amazing that my husband, Barbara Bartolome, who is here in Santa Barbara with me, is just astonished when things come up. And
your new husband, the old husband you left.
He's gone.
This is the good husband.
I've been married 25 years to Victor.
Yes.
And he's terrific.
So how do you feel? Because we have just a short amount of time. How do you feel about dying now?
I have no fear of it at all. None whatsoever. I look forward to being able to go home. That's what I call it, not heaven and hell. I call it going home. And I think we all came from home, and I think we all return to home. But it's nothing that scares me whatsoever. Yeah, I have already proven that in a number of different situations where I was dropped into a situation where I had to act to save someone's life, and I didn't worry about my own life in the situation. I worked to save their life instead, and it was dangerous situations. So I realized that the world is having a tough time right now, and I think near-death experiencers have the message that we need to care about other people, we need to love people, we need to reach out, touch people, help people, and we need to be a world that is connected rather than disconnected. And that's what I think that I got out of my near-death experience.
Well, that certainly is a message for all of us. So to our viewers that might be interested, the local people in going to our local IANDS meeting, tell us when and where they meet or how to get a hold of you. And is there a cost to the meetings? What, tell us a little detail.
It's donation only, so we just tell people to donate from their heart, whatever they would like to support the meeting. And it's on the second Wednesday of every month. And it's at Unity of Santa Barbara at 227 East Arriaga Street. And it's from 7 to 9 p.m. That's our main meeting where we have a guest speaker. But from 6 o'clock to 6:45, we ask that any experiencers come early, and there's a talk group that is really lovely for experiencers only.
Well, Barbara, I thank you for your courage, for your story, for clearly being a pioneer, a leader in this movement, and people can go to the IANDS website and get more information. And thank you for your message of fearless love and courage.
So much.
So we'd like you to just consider signing our book of Living Love. We say to live in hearts that we leave behind is not to die. And I would like to thank Barbara, my guest, my viewers, TVSB for allowing us to do this show, and my cast and crew, Elliot Jacobson, Michael Nicholson, and our volunteer this evening.